Welcome to the 19th episode of Renegade Thinkers Live, a show that promises to be long on marketing insights and short on overhyped buzzwords. We'll be drinking in the latest tactics and the coolest gin. Yep, this may be the only live marketing show that also features a gin tasting. This show is being live streamed via our friends at Restream. And if you want to drink along at home, today we are tasting Dum Shanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from my home studio in New York City. Today we're going to be talking about the all-important world of analyst relations. These are the folks like Gartner and Forrester who can literally put your brand on a map, or with a good review, or who can legitimize your efforts to claim a whole new category, or can relegate your brand to the dreaded doldrums of an undesirable quadrant. Many CMOs recognize that having analysts in their corner is foundational for outbound efforts, and their assessments can also impact long-term retention as competitors exploit more favorable reviews. So in this show, we're going to explore how CMOs start these relationships, gain favorability, leverage good reviews, and overcome the not so good ones. With that, let's bring on Isabelle Papoulias, CMO of Mediafly and star of episode 176 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. Hello, Isabelle. Welcome.
Well, hi, Drew.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm waiting for the gin.
Well, we'll get there. I know a lot of people are waiting for the gin. It's that kind of Thursday, I guess. Anyway, let's talk. So Mediafly is a relatively young company, and I know you've grown a lot during your last 4.5 years there and 30 months as CMO. Can you remember back to the early days and how challenging it was to even get on the analyst radar?
Yeah, I do. Even though I should start by saying that the way we handle analyst relations at Mediafly is perhaps a little different than most other companies like ours. The relationship is managed by our president primarily, with very, very heavy involvement by our CEO. So it's not technically owned by marketing, even though I'm also heavily involved. But it's really led from the very, very top, and it's an enterprise-wide initiative. And I do remember when I started and I started to get involved, I mean, you know, it was hard. It was hard because we didn't quite have a differentiated story. We were still, we were a small company then. And frankly, it was hard for them to take us seriously. I mean, they do look at scale. You know, they look at scale and ARR and how big your clients are, those things. And, you know, back when we weren't the size that we were today. Lots has changed since then with the way analysts looked at us.
And it's interesting to me, and I think it's worth pointing out that the fact that your CEO is paying attention to this and leads this activity only expresses how important it really is to, at least in his or her mind, where they're going. So I'm curious, what was the sort of flipping point or where you sort of move from who are these guys? They're kind of way too small to care about to, oh, wow, okay, we got to start tracking them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, so yeah, just go ahead and there's got to be a moment where suddenly, hey, they care.
Yeah, I would say for us, that turning point was our first acquisition. So we've had 3 acquisitions in 2 years. You know, that's a lot. And when we made that first acquisition, which was the acquisition of Alignian, it's a value selling tool. They were very much included in that decision, right? They helped craft the go-to-market and the vision, and so I would say that was, in my mind, a turning point in the relationship. And then, of course, there was a second acquisition, and then the third, and then fast forward to, I'm in relationships with Forrester currently, and so fast forward to the Forrester wave of last year. And we tackled that differently than the previous waves, which I'm sure we'll touch on later in the conversation. And we performed really, really well and moved way, way up into the right. And so that was another key milestone in our relationship with them.
So I want to go back and break that down, because that's so interesting to me that you would work with the analysts. They, in theory, have a vision for where the category is going, because they obviously are working with with folks who would be potential buyers of your product. And so they have sort of a vision, and literally in conversations with them, they say, well, if you had this too, you would be formidable. And so what's interesting, so that's a bullet point on that. It's like, whoa, it's not just selling them on your current vision, it's sort of getting them involved in the vision. Interesting. So the next part of this, though, that I'm curious about is there's a moment when you make this acquisition and it's just vaporware, because you've got your company and the other company, and nothing's been integrated, right? There's no bridge made, and suddenly you want to promise this sort of integrated thing. How do you sort of decide when you go back to the analysts and say, okay, because they bought into the vision, but that you actually have this product and it works?
I mean, I don't think it's the way we engage with them, frankly, is ongoing. I mean, there are multiple calls with analysts every month. So it's not we had an acquisition, oops, the integration is not quite working the way we planned, and now let's talk to them. I mean, it's ongoing. And I mean, multiple calls a month. Right. So I don't know that I can pinpoint. I don't know if that answers your question exactly. I think it does. It's not the way you want it.
No, but I think it's really interesting. I mean, again, multiple calls a month. These are really close relationships that impact how you talk about your business, what your product roadmap is. This isn't just going to them and sort of like you're going to a film critic and saying, hey, like my movie. These are folks that are actively involved in the business. And you and I had a podcast conversation, gosh, I don't know how long ago it was now, but certainly more like a year and a half ago. And you had just gone through the second of the three acquisitions. And I remember that second one really caused you to rethink the brand. And so I'm imagining at the same time, while the analysts that are advising you also are thinking, wait a second, we've changed as a company and we have to change our story. So how does that work?
Well, so actually, I'm glad you mentioned that example, because that's a very relevant one. I remember it vividly. So as you know, we kind of pivoted the strategy about 2 weeks before the announcement. So, fun times. And I remember having a session with one of the analysts where I shared the communications brief with her. And in fact, her response to me was, okay, it all makes sense, but I feel like you're being a little too polite and a little too shy and not provocative enough. I think you can come out and be a lot more bold. Don't be so polite and nice. So this is to illustrate, right? I mean, you asked me about acquisition specifically and how we engage analysts, but also this is also to illustrate the types of conversations we have and how we engage and how they can help. Mind you, that's not to say that we've always agreed on things. There are things we've done wrong.
Well, we'll get to those. Yeah. We'll get to those things, because I want to come back to you don't always agree with them and got things wrong. That's great. We'll come back to that. The one thing I just wanted to say that I love is the analyst saying to you, be courageous. get out there and be courageous. I love it. All right. So let's bring in Carlos Carvajal, CMO of Q2 and star of episode 211 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. Hello, Carlos.
How you doing, Drew? It's great to be here.
Hey, it's nice to have you here. Let's talk about how involved we've heard from Isabelle. That's sort of, it's led by the president. Where are you with the management of your analysts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually in transition where I'm taking over the programmatic side of analyst relations. So I just joined Q2 in the last 9 months. It's been led by the strategy team, and that's been a good approach. But one of the key things that I'm emphasizing right now and that I've learned over time is, if you think about analyst relations or even influencer relations, the key word there is relations, or think about relationship. And at the core of any relationship is communication, how you listen, and just putting a program around that. So that's a lot of what I'm focused on right now, is kind of getting that message internally, as far as the importance behind the communication strategy, how to make it more programmatic. Some of the points that Isabelle just mentioned as far as the consistency and all those types of things come into play as far as the impact and potential results.
So, and as you're framing it, it feels more like a marketing campaign but the target audience is really small, and you're trying to, in some ways, get them to buy into a story that you hope they agree with. And what was interesting with Isabelle, it was like there's this strong give and take. So how, curious from your standpoint, are you also, is there a feedback loop from them? Or is it more like, hey, here's the story we're hoping to tell. What do you think?
No, it's definitely a feedback loop, but I just think there's some more internal as far as our approach, because listening is critical. Like, if the analysts don't feel like they're being listened to, then that's a bad day, right? So that's the first thing. And even if you don't agree with everything that they say, how do you close the loop? And just close the loop and say, hey, this was great, and we're actually making progress, and this is what you said, and this is what we're doing. But there's some things that we don't necessarily agree on, but we appreciate the input. So I wouldn't say we're necessarily running it as a campaign per se. We're just trying to have more consistency in the cadence of communication and closing the loop and how we communicate. And also, my strong belief from past experience is that analyst relations is a team sport. You cannot be successful in analyst relations through just marketing driving that. You have to have strong buy-in from product. You have to have strong buy-in from sales, channel, everywhere else, because those are the kind of things that the analysts are going to bring up with you. I've had to deal with issues in the past as far as, hey, we don't think you're growing your partner ecosystem as fast. What are you doing in that area? What are you doing around customer references and testimonial? So getting buy-in across the company to help you basically address those topics and really change the game, I think, is critical.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and several things that I could go after. I'm curious, because they're really, what do you do? You mentioned sometimes you don't agree with them. What do you do when their assessment of your business and some of the things that they're saying, whether it's about your product or about what your strategy should be, how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. I think in that case, what I've seen work in the past, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, is just to really make sure that you're communicating the strategy. Frankly, the investment in things like advisory days, beyond just a 30-minute inquiry, going deeper into explaining why and providing the context. And then ultimately, the proof is in the results, right? So if you deviate from a strategy decision, but you're showing strong growth and results, that's something that works itself out. If you deviate from their strategy and the results are not good, then that's a harder conversation to have.
So if you can say, look, we're growing, we've got this covered, we're meeting our numbers, your assessment isn't, the market is reacting differently to what you're saying. You're missing something. You can go back to them. But are they spiteful? Like, you didn't listen to them? We told you to do more partnerships. How come you're not doing it? I mean, or they sort of let it go?
Well, no, I think it depends on the scenario, but let me give you a concrete example from the past, right? So it could be something like, hey, we believe you should look at an expansion strategy international around certain geos and regions. And we may say, you know what, we actually want to pivot to adjacencies more focused in the US. Here's why. We think we have pull, we can drive that out. And then we'll revisit our international strategy and how we grow that. So it's just a different view and the approach and the priority. those kind of things from a strategic discussion. But like I said, if those things pan out and work well, there's not really spite. They kind of understand that sometimes they throw out ideas that are harder to execute, require a certain amount of investment that you can't really pull off, all those kind of things. So just having an open dialogue as part of that relationship is the key.
You know, it's funny because it's one thing when they're assessing the category and doing their evaluation of your product or service, right? You expect them to be able to go in there and talk to customers and really get to know what it is that you're doing. It's another thing when they're saying, sort of hypothetically, when it's not their business, you oughta, you know, right? It's like, that's interesting. But can we just talk about your position on our product and why we're not at the very top of the quadrant?
Yes, and that's so funny because even internally, you have that discussion, you know, sometimes with the CEO, and not here, but previous companies, like, why aren't we just in the top right? Like really simply said, it's like, oh, okay, let me just go fix that tomorrow. But same kind of thing, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, this is amazing. Thank you for that input. Let's welcome Narine Galstian, CMO of SADA Systems. Hello, Narine.
Hi, Drew. Great to be here. Thank you for including me.
Well, excited to have you. You win for being in your role the longest, 8 years. Congrats on your tenure, by the way.
Thank you. It's been a great journey.
There you go. Just curious, how involved are you with analyst relations, and how long has that been?
I started getting involved in analyst relations about 6 years ago from a channel perspective and helping the analysts like Forrester and IDC better understand the channel ecosystem and partnerships. At the time, it was specific to the cloud platform providers like Microsoft and Google Cloud, and helping the analysts understand the business models and margins and where the opportunities lie for the partner ecosystem to grow. So we were able to develop relationships from there with specific analysts, and to be able to go back and provide updates and regular, cadence calls, if you will, to continue to have that kind of thought leadership aspect of it as well. So it wasn't just a one-sided, here's what we're doing from the SADA perspective, but it was also being able to educate them on what's changing in the partner ecosystem and the entire landscape.
So you're doing a lot of spade work, just sort of helping them understand what's going on, which is important. Since you've been there and you've been doing this for 6 years, has your approach evolved, and if so, how?
So their approach has shifted more towards, our specific category in professional services for, cloud solutions. We did divest our Microsoft practice and went all in on Google Cloud, and got noticed from being the, partner of the year, multi-year, and suddenly it was, who is this SADA, right? And competing with the Accentures and Slaloms of the world, and why have we not heard of them before? So then it really made it clear that we needed to, one, make even more investments into developing those relationships in specific categories, and then becoming members of specific analyst groups like Gartner, for example. And working on that relationship and, the feedback loop, as Carlos mentioned too. It was, providing them growth plans, roadmaps, asking for feedback on new products, new solutions, new business models, and being able to take their feedback, seeing what we can and cannot implement, and then providing a report, back to them. But that relationship is also open lines of communication, where they're coming to us and saying, what's next with cloud platforms? What are the next trends? What are your customers asking for? What are they seeing? Where are you successful? So that relationship and trust builds over time.
I think it's so interesting that a business strategy choice, like saying we're going all in on Google Cloud, puts you really you think about the ripple effect of that choice, right? And this is the thing that's so interesting. This goes back to sort of just so many businesses lack the courage to have a focus like this. But by changing, saying we're not doing everybody, we're focused on Google Cloud, suddenly a lot of things changed for you, including the way analysts think about you. So the connection from strategy to analysts and making some hard choices, or let's put it this way, focus choices, to me, your story is a huge example of that. So thank you for that. And is that a fair interpretation that, but this business strategy catapulted your ability, suddenly they had a reason to pay attention to you that they didn't before?
Sure. I think when you're in kind of the professional services side of things and being able to go all in on one particular cloud platform, you're making a really strong statement of this is where our expertise and our business strategy is going to be invested in. And suddenly they're like, why would you, only go with one, right? So, based on the earnings call yesterday from Google Cloud, I hope it all makes sense for everyone why we decided to go all in on Google. It certainly has catapulted our brand and our business model and revenues overall, where we're doubling our business. And it's it provides the credibility to our customers that we are the experts in this cloud platform.
Let's just applaud this notion in this moment for listeners of this show, watchers of this show. Sometimes, because at one point you probably cut loose a big chunk of your business in order to focus on the one. And in doing that, it doubled and so forth. It's just such an important perspective. Okay, let's bring everybody back. And let's say that you are at a smaller company that is growing pretty quickly, that hadn't really been on analyst radar. Where do you start? Is there a playbook that you can offer some advice on how to get going? I mean, do you go after all four of the big guys? Do you focus on one? What's a way of getting in with some analysts?
I would say I would explore.
Go for it, Isabelle.
A number of them, and then and obviously start with mutual briefings, right? That's the first step, because you want to make sure that you're sharing a common vision of the category and aspirations of where it's going. But I would cast a relatively wide net. I'm not talking 15 analysts, but more than one.
Okay, so Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think the thing for me, just thinking about other companies I've been at and smaller companies, is prioritizing. Like, do you have like tier 1, tier 2, and who's your number one? Like, who is the analyst that can make the biggest impact, and making sure that you prioritize and why they're going to make the biggest impact. I can think of one company where I was at within the last few years where it was like, we know that we have a real shot, even being smaller, of getting to the leader section in the benchmark report with this one particular influential analyst, where the other ones, probably not so much. It was going to take a lot more effort. So we were going to like triple down. Like, we're going to really go hard on them and still maintain the relationship with the other ones. But if we can build a momentum with one, then that gives us a way to actually then pivot into the other ones and show more momentum as a company.
It's such a great point. And again, it's this notion of focus, because if you get the one analyst on your side, you have something you can market against, right? Obviously, it would be nice to have them all, but when you're small, take a win and run with it. Anything to add on that, Narine, in getting started with these programs?
Yeah, I would say before any of that outreach actually happens, that you really take a good look at your story. What is your story? Where are you differentiating yourself in the competitive landscape? What's your secret sauce, right, that you're bringing to the table? And you have to really feel confident in what you're delivering when you get on the phone with an analyst, right? Because they're going to ask you, what is your secret sauce? Who are your competitors? How are you differentiating your products and services? So that's the first step. And second is, I agree with Carlos. I mean, definitely prioritize. who are your top analysts that you do that are heavy hitters in your space and category, and have a plan of action of not just a one-shot kind of engagement, but really establishing a cadence with them, and maybe making an investment, sponsoring an event that they're doing, getting on a panel for a conference or some sort of summit that they're doing, so that you're contributing to them as much as you're asking them to contribute to you.
Yeah, it's a pay-to-play world. I mean, in many ways, and you just have to acknowledge that. And again, getting some focus here can really, really help. Okay, we're gonna first. I'm going to talk about CMO huddles because that's how we all came together. And I'll give a little plug for that, and then we'll talk about. So CMO Huddles was launched in 2020. It's an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment, while another called it a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. If you're a B2B CMO that can share and care with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com or send me an email or on LinkedIn or a comment or something to see if you qualify for a guest pass. Okay, so just curious, Nadine, Carlos, Isabelle, would you like to share anything about your experience with CMO huddles? Anybody?
Yeah, the experience has been awesome. I love learning. I'll just give a couple real examples, and this may be funny actually, but like Isabelle, for example, you're not even aware of this, but just from previous calls and the learnings, I've actually applied that to my team. We're actually talking to a conversational marketing vendor based on your presentation and your team and the learnings and that was incredibly helpful. And then Drew, your summary emails from I think last month around how hard it was to actually get talent and how competitive the market is, actually shared that with our HR and people team to basically help justify doing offers at a higher base, basically, right? So there's just so much goodness from the learnings and the dialogue and everything else that has been invaluable.
I'm blushing. That's awesome. Isabelle or Nadine, anything? Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, I second that 100%. I'm a big fan. And one of the things I love the most, frankly, is the smaller environment. I know many other peer groups are very large, and because of the format of the CMO huddles, there's, maybe 10, 15 people on each of the sub peer groups, which makes it really easy to build one-on-one relationships. And I've developed quite a few of those. And, that type of one-on-one networking as a result of your groups, Drew, has been very, very helpful to me. I love that.
I love that. Okay. Noreen, you don't have to say anything, but feel free.
Well, I do want to kind of quickly add the huddles are really a great way to share those insights, especially on tools, agencies. I've gotten some great recommendations for PR agencies. I've gotten some great recommendations for tools, and also for reporting ABM campaigns. So I think there's definitely some value of we tried this, it worked, it didn't work, here's what I recommend. That's really key.
Okay, I love it. And thank you all for that. Let's get back to the analyst thing that's going on. And Isabelle, you mentioned when things go bad or you disagree a little bit and they can go wrong or a pitch doesn't work. I'm curious, can you give an example of and maybe it was something that didn't quite work the way you planned and how you sort of recovered?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of I'll give you two examples. How's that? The first one, back to not always agreeing with analysts.
Right.
It's the right decision. They were really pushing us at one point to add a major new feature, and essentially we're saying no. And in fact, and now I remember being in an executive offsite and saying, well, just because an analyst says we have to do something doesn't mean that we have to do it. And mind you, by not agreeing with them in that particular case, we hurt ourselves because that specific feature actually ended up being a table stakes for the sales enablement category, and we lost quite a few deals to competitors because we were too late in executing on that, and eventually we did. But, we didn't listen, we didn't agree, but we caught up eventually. That's
so
one
in that
example.
case, it was right. That was where they were saying, here's something to do. You didn't do it, and you paid the price. So, okay, second example.
Yeah. Second example was our last Forrester wave. We were very pleased with our scores ultimately, but it definitely took some negotiation back and forth, and things got tense. There was a moment where things got tense.
Right.
And that's okay. And so sometimes you really do have to have the confidence to push and have the conviction.
So we're right that you really know that you really have what you say you have, and you can push them on it. I want to get one more sort of war story, if I will, that will make us really want to have a drink after. So Noreen, maybe you want to share, or Carlos, the circumstance that just didn't quite go as you had hoped, and what you did or didn't do.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, and this was a few years ago, where we missed an opportunity to be included in a Magic Quadrant, research report that came out, and that was, we basically didn't brief the analysts properly in making sure that we're included and really bringing that competitive scenario and that differentiator to the table to be considered in being included.
Got it. Yeah, and that's a bummer because you feel that pain right away. If you're not in that quadrant, it's like you don't exist, at least to those customers. Okay, it is time for the gin tasting. Grab your gin, your ice cold glass. We'll be back in 1 minute.
A smart person learns from their mistakes. A wise person learns from other people's mistakes. There's great value in this CMO huddle.
This one has consistently brought value to the table. There's value at every step.
The continuity of familiar faces is also quite nice. You can start to form some deeper relationships.
It's a nice break in your week from a lot of other meetings.
None of us is as smart as all of us. Every huddle I go away with one idea that I didn't know before.
We have implemented a number of things that have made a significant amount of difference.
It's a really high caliber group of very passionate CMOs.
Share these best practices, but do it in a circle of trust.
It's an amazing group of people.
Jackie has constantly reminded me that we need a call to action on everything we do. So if you are a CMO that can share and care and dare with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com. How's that for a call to action, Jackie? All right. So today's gin, I can't tell you how excited I am to share this. This is one of my all-time favorites, Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin. And we're really excited to have Sean McGowan, the marketing manager at the Shed Distillery, where Drumshanbo is made. Sean.
How are we? Full broker there. How are we all doing this evening?
We're doing great. Look at you in the distillery there. That's so cool. And it's got to be, it's got to be late in Ireland.
It's only 9:30, so it's not too bad for us. We're happy to keep the place open, happy to be drinking with you this evening.
Yeah, well, it's a better time for you to be drinking than probably for us. But tell us a little bit about this gin and Drumshanbo and what makes it so special.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we're coming to you live from here in the Shed Distillery, which is the home of Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin. And the gin itself and the whole Shed Distillery was the brainchild of who we like to call the curious mind of PJ Rigney. And PJ himself, he's a real maverick. He's an absolute experimenter. He's a little bit mad, but he knows exactly what he's doing when it comes to brands. PJ himself, he's been in the drinks industry now for about 35 years. And he's always been about creating new and exciting brands here in Ireland and bringing them to all four corners of the world. So some of you here may be familiar with Sheridan's Irish Cream. I don't know if you remember the black and the white bottle that stick together. Pat actually created Sheridan. So the liquid, the pack, the marketing behind it, all of that. But probably what he's best known for is the rebrand of what we all now know as Bailey's Irish Cream. And it was actually when he was working with Bailey's, he was managing their Asian markets for them. And it was when he was there that he came across this guy here. This is Chinese gunpowder tea, and this is where Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin gets its name. And this is kind of what sparked all the curiosity in his mind to finally set up his own dream distillery back home in Ireland. So what PJ decided to do was he actually set off from China on this amazing journey all across the globe, back home to Drumshanbo, but along the way he picked up all these various different herbs, fruits and botanicals that he could come back here to the laboratory of creation in Drumshanbo to start experimenting with the different flavors and aromas that he had encountered on his curious journey all over the world. And it was 12 different botanicals that he finally came up with, but it took a lot of experimentation with himself and our head distiller Brian Taft to finally get there to come up with these 12 different botanicals to be used finally in Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin.
I love it. At this point, I bet Carlos, Isabelle, and Narine, you are anxious to try this. I don't know about you, but I've never had this just cold, straight up. So let's give it a sip and let me know what you think.
I'm gonna pass. I have meetings.
Oh, there you go. No worries. So, Isabelle, I know you turned it into a drink last night, right?
Yeah, I actually, so I cheated. I already tried it because I couldn't. The bottle is so beautiful and I love gin. So I had to try it. And it's pretty spectacular. And I'm a huge gin lover, so thank you for this. This is a treat.
This is amazing.
No problem at all. You're all very, very welcome. So especially when you're tasting it neat, you're really going to get a lot of fresh citrus up front because the way we distill it is we like to call it a Drumshanbo dry style of gin. So we actually take 8 of those 12 botanicals and they go into our medieval style copper pot. And as those botanicals are distilling, attached to our still, we have these very special vapor baskets into which we put our Chinese gunpowder tea, along with fresh lemons, limes, and grapefruits. So we only use fresh citrus in the distillation. What that gives Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin is this lovely, smooth, fresh citrus taste to it, slowly followed after it then by these kind of spicier oriental botanicals, the likes of your star anise and your cardamom coming through. And then just on the finish, you're going to get this kind of very long, lingering, mysterious finish. And that's coming in from the gunpowder tea itself.
Amazing. All right. Well, I need to interrupt you because we have a botanical expert on this show. And so, Nicole, will you join us for a second?
Hi, everyone.
Nicole, tell us, what the heck is gunpowder tea anyway?
Well, gunpowder tea is actually a form of tea, and each leaf is rolled into small round pellets, hence its name. And it can also be called pearl tea, depending on the shape of the pellet. And it has a bold, smoky taste. And fun fact, these rolled leaves can keep their taste and properties for over 10 years because they're folded into small balls.
Wow, there you go. All right. Well, it's funny because when I first had this, I thought the gunpowder was part of the flavor. And that there was sort of that smokiness to it. All right, Nicole, thank you for that. Sean, did we have anything else that we wanted to cover? I know there was some other notes that, and Melissa, maybe was there one other thing we were going to do?
There was one other thing, and I have a special guest here to join me. I have Narine, who's our global brand developer and head of mixology here at the Shed. Cian is going to show you how to make the perfect Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin and Tonic. So Cian, take it away. Ladies and gents, good afternoon. How's everyone keeping? So, what I want to show you all today is how to make the perfect Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin and Tonic. So the first thing you got to grab is a nice glass. So we have our bespoke Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin glass. And the first thing we got to do is get a nice hefty measure. So we're going to go with about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces of Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin. We're going to pour that straight into the glass. Next thing we want to do is get lots of ice. So in order to have it very, very refreshing, you want to put lots and lots of ice. We're going to chill down that drink, and it's going to make it for more of an enjoyable experience. So we're going to crack it over with lots of ice. See? And then we're going to go with some tonic water. Now we recommend really using a really nice premium tonic water. So what that does is there's less sugar in premium tonic water. That allows for the quinine to really incorporate with the fresh botanicals and that fresh citrus and gunpowder tea and Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin. So the effervescence in the premium tonic water is going to carry all of that lovely, vibrant citrus tones all the way up to the drinker's mouth and nose. We're going to give it a nice little stir. We're just going to again incorporate all of those lovely sort of fresh fiber notes. And then the star of the show then is our ruby red grapefruit. So that's what we're going to garnish them with there. So again, as John mentioned, we're tying in all those beautiful vapor-infused notes from that fresh citrus and gunpowder tea. And that ruby red grapefruit is going to tie it all together. It's going to be the glue. And it's going to make for a really, really great experience. So guys, Sláinte, and I hope you're enjoying your signature Shambo Gunpowder Irish Gin and Tonic.
Thank you so much. All right, let's get back to the show. That was amazing. Thank you very much, Shed Distillery, for that, both the gin and the demonstration. Would never have considered putting grapefruit in my gin and tonic. So there you go. We learn something every day. Anyway, let's get back to this topic at hand. And I'm curious, talk about a moment where something went really well and what it took to get that. Just this sort of moment where,
So I can give one example. It might just take a second. And it's different than a pitch, but we were rolling out a new product line for a new market segment we were going after that had a lot of growth potential. And literally just asked the analyst, because we had a good relationship, if you were in our shoes, how would you approach you? And what would the strategy be if we wanted to get in the leader section, let's say 2 years from now? And surprisingly, the analyst just gave us a lot of great feedback, but this is something I wanted to share with everybody. I've never done this before. What he came back with said, hey, you need to do a dry run of the benchmark of the actual report evaluation. So not the actual evaluation, but go through a cycle, and it was a paid engagement. And we actually filled it all out. And long story short, it helped us identify where the gaps were, and then we could actually action them so that when the cycle came up for the actual report, we actually did really well. And we did get into the leader section. It was pretty amazing. And I'd never stopped to think about a dry run type concept with an analyst. So that was something that made a huge impact.
Yeah, it's kind of like doing SAT prep.
Yeah,
right? Just do a couple practice runs. You figure out, I don't know these words. Okay, that's very cool. Any other sort of success stories that you want to share, Noreen or Isabelle?
From our side, I think it was when we were giving an update and having just won our award for Partner of the Year and record-breaking numbers, and the analyst was like, how are you not in that, circle? How did we miss you? It really they took ownership of the fact that we didn't do our homework right, and I think that just really, brings forth that it's also on you to educate them, right? You can't just think because they're analysts, they know all the players in the ecosystem, or that they know exactly what trends or what partners are playing there. It's really on you to make sure that you're always ahead and you're always top of mind. And then that learning just goes both ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's really this notion of assuming nothing. And it gets back to sort of what Carlos is talking about, this drumbeat of information that is steady and consistent. They are fallible. And the other thing to remember in all of this is for each one of you, there are 10 competitors who are sending information to them. And so it made me wonder, since everybody has an analyst program of some level or another, I mean, what is, Narine, your thing is interesting in that they missed it and you've sort of got validation in another way. And that's interesting. But is there any whining and dining with these people? I mean, I know it's in the pre-COVID. Can you send them a bottle of gin? I mean, what can you do that will help you sort of get at least a conversation started with someone who says, I know everything about this already. You got nothing new for me. Any thoughts on that?
I personally think there is, just pre-COVID, and I think it's important as a CMO and as an executive to have a one-on-one, even if it's going out to lunch and off, just building that relationship and having that kind of dialogue because over time, I remember having a beer with one of the lead analysts at Forrester, and it was, at a bar where we're just kind of chatting, and that's where we got into kind of the real discussion, like, look, these are the things you really got to dig into because this is what's hurting. And having that kind of dialogue is very different than a formal meeting with like 10 people and everything else. So personally, I think it helps.
One of the things that we had, go ahead.
Sorry, Drew, I just wanted to add, I think it's also important to include the analysts. So for example, if you're at a conference where analysts are going to be there and your customers are there and you're hosting an event, include the analysts in that event, allow them the opportunity to talk to your customers. That's kind of the firsthand, experience they're going to get to validate your services and, kind of bring to the forefront of what differentiates you. So don't hesitate in inviting them to those types of events.
And I know that happened a lot in pre-pandemic era. I'm curious because in huddles over the last year, we've talked a lot about these smaller events where you have 10 customers and you have, 10 customers, a couple of prospects, but I've never heard anybody said we also had analysts at those virtual events, like the virtual wine tasting and I'm just curious, have you included analysts in those kinds of things over the last year and a half?
We have, and we do that regularly, and I apologize for the downtown Chicago background noise. Both exactly that, actually, we had a wine tasting recently. Where that happened, we regularly invite analysts on webinars as speakers, presenters. Back in the day when we had the physical events, obviously that happened too. So I know someone mentioned the word campaign earlier. I forget who it came from, but that resonated with me. I mean, yes and no. It is a campaign and it's not a campaign. But my point is we're deploying different tactics to build those relationships, right? It's the physical events, it's the digital events, it's the advisory days, right? Where you bring them in and it's maybe a full day of discussions. It's the one-on-one phone calls. It's it's all of these elements together that build the relationship over time. I don't think there's only one tactic that works better. I think it truly is a combination of things.
The one thing and as you're talking about that, it feels like, well, you would say the same thing about a prospect campaign, but one of the things that marketers do is they think about the overarching story and the consistency of that story and how that packaging that story. And so one of the reasons why it seems to make sense to me that a marketer versus, say, a sales or CEO is they would think about the story and make sure that story is be told simply and consistently, as opposed to whatever the notion is at the moment, right? And so you would try to, and that's why I think this campaign idea also makes sense, right? Now I have no proof that what I'm talking about works, but except for we know that it works with any other form of communication. Consistency matters. So am I making that up, or are you proof? So
I totally agree with that, Drew. It is a consistent messaging that has to go out, and once you build the foundation of your story, you just keep adding and hitting on the points of your story, and it could be more customer references that kind of prove your product or solution, right? It could be the growth story and how you're continuously meeting that plan in advance of it, or going back and reevaluating that. So that consistency in the messaging is like any other campaign that you would do with prospects or install base. You have to make it part of your overall messaging.
I'm curious for the three of you, if you've ever been part of a new category creation and how that differs from sort of, you're just trying to get in the upper right corner of the quadrant, in when an existing category, but you're trying to, and there's many times where you're saying, wait, we need to break out from here into here. I'm just curious if any of you have done that experience and how that changes your approach.
So not deliberately, but I've been in situations where it's almost like the analysts are splitting an existing category into subcategories, and all of a sudden they start referring to you as something else, and so you end up in that quadrant or that wave, or
So and then you've been the victim of them creating new categories, not the driver of it in some ways.
In some ways, yeah. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but yes, it's them driving it as opposed to the other way around.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I hadn't prepared any of you for that notion, and we've talked about category creation and other things, so we can just move on from there. This is the moment where I ask, what would Ben Franklin say? And I know that might seem random, but we are talking about essentially a third party that's going to define your reputation, that in fact, and that the third party that's so credible that they can make or break your business. So here's what Ben Franklin would say. Glass, china, and reputation are easily cracked and never well mended. So this is this point where if you get in that lower quadrant, it's really hard to fix it, which is just, yeah, thanks, Ben, for that. Okay, so give us an example of a recent interaction with an analyst. Set the scene, tell us the approach that you took. Let's start with Isabelle.
Sure, so I mentioned advisory days as one of the many forms of engagement. So we had I think it was 2 half days of an advisory session with an analyst. Typically, we do these a couple of times a year, and we do them, in a physical location. But because this was a remote environment, as we all know, it happened via Zoom, and it was a messaging and ICP advisory day because we were in the process of refreshing our brand positioning, revisiting our ICP, and so on. And I was frankly fully expecting that analyst to throw a bomb into all the work I had done, because you never know how these things are going to go, right? And so the way they typically go into these sessions is there's a lot of pre-work that they would expect us to do. They hadn't realized that we had done a lot of our own work yet. So instead we preempted their process, and I said to them, well, we're going to come. I'm not going to fill out all of those things you wanted to fill out because I've already done the work. So I'm going to come and actually show you things for you to react to, right? My SCP segments and a messaging map and all those things. And so that's how we did it, and got her reaction, asked her to go back and do homework. So kind of digest, process, think about the competition, and come back to us with feedback on the second day. And it was, it couldn't have done better.
So you went bold. Instead of saying, listen, you went saying, hey, check this out. What do you think? And you got, you slayed the dragon. Awesome.
That feels
right. Carlos, you want to share a quick interaction recently and how it went?
Quick interaction. This is one of the leading analysts in our space. There was some past baggage. So that's kind of setting the scene. So a lot of it was going in, and this is an analyst I knew from past companies, was just kind of talking through it and getting into the kind of the frank heart-to-heart conversation around what were the issues, and then making the commitment. I am committed to this relationship. The team and the company is committed to this relationship, and how we're going to move forward. And now we're already, this is just in the last couple of months, in a better spot as far as how we're working together and just impactful things, because one example is just this week, they passed a lead to us for a great opportunity, right? So it's kind of night and day as far as a few months ago. It was like a little bit combative, and now we're starting to get to a much better place.
Built a bridge, just sort of connected to them in a way that they said, okay, we get it. Noreen.
Yeah, similar to what Carlos said, I think, building that bridge is really important, where you get to a point where the analyst really, really understands your business, and that, it just kind of goes off, and then suddenly they're thinking about, hey, I have customers that could really utilize this. How do I engage both of you together? How do I make those introductions? So they become your advocate. So, that's exactly what happened on a recent call. And I that's when you feel really confident of like, okay, this went exactly how it was supposed to. And you come out of it having that person on your side and being top of mind for them. So when they do their calls with other customers, they're thinking about your solutions and services.
I just had this sort of crazy vision of, Isabelle calls this analyst and they go, oh, we love your product. We just recommended it. And then Carlos calls different company. Oh, we love your product. We just recommended it. I mean, these folks are getting pitched so often that, I wonder if it's the last call in is the one that they're, influenced by. And I'm not giving them the credit that they deserve, but what is one no-no? One big no-no when it comes to analyst relations. We'll start with Noreen.
I would say the one big no-no is never be combative. Always just keep an open mind and listen respectfully. I think you always should take back the information they give you and recommendations they give you. Really think about it and be able to come back to them with, yes, we decided to implement this. No, we didn't implement this because of X, Y, Z, but never in a way of a combative, attitude that they somehow don't know what they're talking about or they don't understand your space. It's not what's going to help you build that relationship.
This is not a scene from the movie Liar, Liar. We're not going to reenact that. Okay, Carlos, one no-no.
I couldn't agree more with Narine. The combative point to me is huge. And then I'll just add, don't ignore them.
Yeah, we're not going to ignore them. They're just too important. Okay, Isabelle, a no-no?
I mean, I agree with both Carlos and Narine. So the third one that comes to mind is more about relational engagement. It's like know your buttons, their buttons. Again, going back to so that you don't come across as combative. For example, when I mentioned the advisory day and me essentially saying, no, I won't do it your way, I'll take over the agenda, I might not have been able to do that with another analyst. Right. But I knew I could push the boundaries with that one.
So really understand your audience and where they're coming from. I was also thinking of a conversation we had in Huddles where we were talking about the book, Never Split the Difference. And because we were talking in the context of a board asking you a question. And one of the things that comes up in Never Split a Difference is this, when they ask a question that seems impossible, you sort of push back a little bit and say, great question. How am I going to do that? And you sort of turn it around because they might just ask and just have asked an impossible question. Okay, final words of wisdom. We'll start, Isabelle. Last thing on this subject.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is for all of us involved with analysts, there's always a wave or quadrant or rectangle or triangle, whatever the thing is. And the way I think about it is that one starts, the next one starts when the last one ends.
Yeah, it doesn't end. That's the point. There is no finish line here. Okay, that's great. Carlos.
Your credibility lives and dies on your customers. You can have really crisp messaging, you can tighten everything up, but if they're not hearing that from the customers or references, it doesn't work. So my experience over time is they care less and less about what you're saying, and they're paying a lot more attention to what your customers are saying. And triple check your references.
That is such a great point, and it's one of the reasons why, again, I feel like if marketing can own customer interactions and so forth, because and has a board of advisors and gets them in so that they're becoming part of it, that this messaging gets back to the analyst, and it strengthens that case. Okay, Narine.
I agree with both Carlos and Isabelle. Really, I think one, you need to make it part of your marketing strategy and make it a priority. And two, the customer references, as it's important for, reaching out to your prospects or, customer references for press, you have to make it a priority for analysts as well. It's across the board. That has to be part of your marketing strategies to tell more stories.
Tell more stories. Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Narine, Isabelle, Carlos, you're great sports. Thank you, Sean, for teaching us about fantastic Drumshanbo Gunpowder Irish Gin. And thank you, audience, for staying with us. Please join us in 2 weeks when we'll be talking about a CMO's first 90 days with Dave Bornman, Jennifer Davis, and Julie Kaplan. Cue the music.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Renegade Thinkers Live is produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our intern is Sam White. Our botanical expert is Nicole Hernandez. For show notes and past episodes, please visit renegade.com, home of quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing boutique in New York City. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.